In this video, we are going to go over how to use texture paste correctly, common beginner mistakes to avoid, and then in the end, we're going to be creating a simple texture art painting together from start to finish. And this here is texture paste. Sometimes it's called modeling paste or structure paste. Basically, it's the same thing, different brands just call their products with different names. It is a beginner-friendly material that is used to add texture to paintings and other arts and crafts projects. And this paste is water-based and it's designed to be used together with acrylic paints. So how do you use texture paste? First step is to always mix the paste properly in the jar before you use it. And let's have a look at how it is straight from the box. Here's how it looks mixed. And here's how it looks when you first open it. So to get the smooth, creamy consistency, we want to mix the paste thoroughly. I'm just scooping all the way through the bottom. And can you see how smooth it is now? And the reason to mix it is because during storage, some of the heavier ingredients might descend towards the bottom of the jar, or some water might separate from the paste and rise to the top of the jar. And we, of course, want all of the ingredients nicely and evenly mixed throughout the jar so we get ideal results. Here is another brand of modeling paste that's sat on my shelf for over a year. And you can see it's clear liquid, so water that has separated from the paste that now needs to be mixed back into it before we can use it. And one really common beginner mistake or question I get all the time is, do you add things like water or glue into the paste? And don't do that. The texture paste is ready to use as is, straight from the jar. Just give it a quick mix and it's good to go. No water, no glue, no baking soda. Don't add anything like that. I think this is something that's stuck to people's minds after seeing a bunch of do-it-yourself recipes for different pastes online, and then when they go get ready-made pastes, they think, oh, I need to add something like glue to it as well. But you don't. The beauty of using ready-made texture paste intended for arts and crafts is that it's convenient, ready to use straight from the jar, so you don't need to do anything to it and you know it's going to work. You can color the paste with some acrylic paint, and I made a separate video on the 3 techniques to coloring texture paste or texture art, and I have it here somewhere on the screen for you. And once mixed, we can go straight to using it. And you can use a variety of tools to create different patterns on the canvas or other base you're using. And common tools include, for example, palette knives, combs, stencils, and piping bags. And after we're done creating our pattern, it's time to let the textures dry. The drying time depends on the thickness and temperature. Thinner layers might dry in a few hours, but for thicker ones, it is best to wait for at least 24 hours or even longer if the textures still seem wet. Before you continue working on your artwork, it's best if you test it first to see if the textures are actually dry. You can do it simply by tapping on it. If it feels hard and sounds like this, it is probably dry. We could now paint over the textures, sand it, or just continue working on our painting overall. And some designs might also be finished immediately after you've done with the textures. And we then wait for it to fully dry and cure, and then finish the artwork with acrylic varnish. But if you're just making your first paintings, feel free to skip that step now. If you're new to textured art and want to learn more, I put together a series of blog posts and articles on my website for free. No opt-in required. I'll have a link somewhere in the description. Make sure to check that out as well. So what are some of the common beginner mistakes people make with texture paste? 1. Mixing in too much acrylic paint with the paste. Too much paint means that the paste will lose its consistency. And the best way to color it is to use high quality, well-pigmented acrylic paint. And if you need to use more than just a little paint, it's better to go for heavy body acrylics rather than the regular soft body ones. So the surface level might seem dry, but underneath it is still wet. And when you touch or start painting on top of soft textures, you will end up ruining your pattern. So wait for it to fully dry first. And another common mistake is spreading the texture paste too thick in a single layer. And good quality texture pastes like this one can be applied to around 1, maybe up to 2 centimeters in thickness. If you want to create really thick textures, best way to do that is to create it in multiple layers. So you'd create one layer, let it fully dry, and then create another layer on top. And as a quick tip, if you want to create big, bulky artwork without using too much paste, use a deep edge canvas rather than a regular one. This alone will give you an extra centimeter or even a bit more than that in thickness. And another mistake is using too fluid or the wrong type of paint. Texture pastes are meant for acrylic paints, so stick to them. As it's water-based, it will not work too well with watery paints. You can dilute your acrylics a little, but if you soak the paste, you might ruin it. We've talked about the different mistakes and things not to do, but as a little reassurance, texture dot and texture paste is actually really easy to work with and very beginner friendly. If you make a mistake or just not happy with the result, you can simply reset the canvas and do it again. You can also easily practice, and if you're not happy with the result, you can always just scrape off the paste from the canvas, put it back in the jar and try again later. And next up is the best part, where we get to apply all of the knowledge we just went through and create together your very first texture art painting from start to finish. One of the things that makes this design particularly good for beginners is that we can complete it together in a single session. There's no starting now, letting it dry, and then maybe hopefully continuing on it a week from now and never actually finishing it. We're gonna start it now, we're gonna finish it now together. And these are all of the materials we're going to need. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different things, not a lot. I have a palette. You could use just a lid of a plastic container, basically any surface where you can mix some paint and paste. Then I have a single palette knife, some masking tape, raw umber, acrylic paint, pick whatever color you want. Of course, my own brand of texture paste, and a pre-primed stretched cotton canvas that is 40 by 50 centimeters in size. I like to have blank white edges around the canvas, so the first step we're going to do is just take some masking tape and apply it on the canvas. Now sometimes I like to seal the masking tape with some white acrylic paint and a paintbrush, but this time I want to keep the materials required for this so simple, so I'm not going to do that. I'll just push down with my finger and hope that the masking tape sticks properly to the canvas. And what is the first step we're going to do with the texture paste? I hope you remember by now. It is, of course, to mix it thoroughly in the jar so that all of the ingredients are nicely and evenly spread. Then I'm going to take some paste on our palette, and I want to add just the tiniest amount of paint to it, and then we mix it throughout. We could even start the first row with no paint at all. And then with the palette knife, I'm just going to scoop up some paste and we'll spread it on the top part of the canvas. And as you noticed, I overlapped the masking tape slightly, and I'll start the same way here on this side as well. So coming from the tape to the canvas rather than from the canvas to the tape, so we don't risk getting any underneath. And next, using the tip of our palette knife, I'm just going to pull down a simple pattern like this. And an easy variation for this would be to do small patterns like this and use different sized palette knives. But this time I'm going to go for the long pattern. Then we'll take a little bit more texture paste and add a tiny bit more acrylic paint. The color should be slightly darker than the previous row, and we can easily check it by taking some on our palette knife and comparing it, and yes, it is different. So now we'll do the second row. And then we repeat the pattern, and if we make some mistake, we can just easily flatten it out and go again. So don't be afraid to fail, you can just fix it in a matter of seconds. And as our goal is to finish this painting in one session without having to paint over the textures, one thing to avoid here is pushing down so hard with the palette knife that you reveal the canvas underneath. So this is a common beginner mistake here to avoid. Press fairly gently on the paste so that we can create the pattern, but we don't reveal the canvas. And if that happens accidentally, simply flatten out the paste and go again. And composition wise, one thing you might want to avoid is just having straight and similar width rows, one after the other. So in my opinion, this design becomes much more interesting when we add some angles to the pattern. So for this third row, I'm gonna go a bit further down on this side and then make it slightly narrow on this other end. And when coloring the texture paste, remember to mix it thoroughly so we get one uniform color with this design. If your paste ends up unevenly colored like here, the artwork will pretty quickly look quite unfinished and messy. So make sure to mix the paste properly. And creating this painting teaches you good basic texture art skills. So how to use the texture paste overall and how do you color it properly, how to use palette knives to create a simple pattern. You'll also get an idea for basics of composition, and most importantly, you actually finish a painting. So you get started and finish something, which then gives you the motivation to continue and creating more and more. And then pretty quickly you realize you have a nice new creative hobby and you learned a completely new skill. And now as soon as we're done with the pattern, we're going to immediately remove the masking tape. We don't want the paste to dry on top of the tape because in that case there's a risk that when we remove the tape, we're going to pull some of the textures from our painting as well. And that's how you create your very first texture art painting. It took us maybe 15 minutes of working time and just 6 things to create it. And next up, we're going to let it dry, let's say about 24 hours, and then you can hang it on your wall. Or if you've done more than a few paintings already, next step would be to varnish it. But if this was your first, don't worry about it.